Hey, I am excited about this new series. It's called Making Change, and it obviously has kind of a double entendre there. It's got one sense of like, yeah, I've got to make some changes to my life, and two, it has to do with money, so it's about making change. And talking about money from a preacher's perspective, it's like they either love it or hate it, right? It's like I remember though in my household growing up, we did not talk about money. I mean, we didn't talk about it, like how to save it, how to use it. The only talk my mom ever gave me was like how to tithe. That was the only thing. It was like, here's a dime, 10 cents and pennies, give one to God, keep 9 for yourself, use it how you want to. That was kind of the extent of my monetary training as a child, which is probably why I'm in the financial shape I am today. But anyway, so we didn't talk about it. The thing is, like, and you may be feeling it today, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I walk into church for the first time and what they're going to do is talk about money. Well, blending spirituality and money together may feel odd to you. I mean, one of the reasons why my household of origin didn't talk about money is because we somehow felt like it was not spiritual to talk about money. But how many of us, though, have like prayed that we would get a particular job, right? You've got a job out here, you've been applying for it, and even if you're not a Christian, it's just like you're praying to somebody, the universe, Oprah, Tom Cruise. You're going to some spiritual source and saying, look, would you help me to get this job somehow, or help me to get this raise, or help me to gain enough income to be able to buy a house, or to rent a house, whatever it is, like you're going to some source outside of yourself that's not just a physical source. You're going to some kind of spiritual source. You're reaching out in some way so that you can get help. Well, as Christians, the good news about blending together spirituality and money is like they're inseparable. When you start looking at the Bible, you start realizing that the reality of life is that you cannot separate money and your relationship with God. Those two things are very much going to be joined together. And so we're going to look at that in the series this next several weeks. We're going to be talking about money for that very reason, because it's like if we don't get money right in our relationship to money, the reality is we don't get our relationship with God right either, quite honestly. In this series, I want to talk about some laws and some principles that if you ignore them, they're going to get you into some kind of trouble. Laws and principles are just as simple as things like gravity, right? If there's a law that governs this universe called gravity, it's like two bodies get drawn together, and you find that out real fast if you're on a 20-foot building and you step off the edge. You realize that what's governing the universe is not your hope that maybe you won't break a leg when you hit the ground, but you will hit the ground at a very rapid speed. The higher the building, the higher the speed. That's the way the law of gravity works. Or if you think you can defy the law of physics, you go running into a brick wall thinking you can just like go through it. Well, you probably won't. And if you touch a hot stove and you hang on a little too long, guess what? You're going to get burned. There are laws that govern life. There are laws that govern our physical universe, and there are laws and principles that govern the way that we view money and how money works as well. The problem with my analogies so far is like they're all like immediate, right? It's like cause effect. You just see it. You jump off a building, you break a leg. You touch a hot stove, you get burned. The problem with money laws is it's not always that way. In fact, it's not usually that way. The kind of laws that the Bible gives us, that Jesus talks about when he talks about money, and we should listen to Jesus because, right, I mean, he died on a cross, he rose in 3 days. I think he's someone we can pay attention to when it comes to like how the world works around us, right? He says things like this. It's like sowing and reaping. It's a gardening idea. I'm going to put a seed in the ground. Well, when I put a seed in the ground, what do I get? Another seed? No, I get a whole bunch of seed, right? I put corn in the ground, I get a whole bunch of corn. I don't just get one thing back, I get a whole lot more. But it doesn't happen immediately. There's time that has to elapse between. So there's habits that you have formed, that I have formed in regard to money that may be good habits and they're going to bear good fruit, or they may be bad habits and they're going to bear bad fruit. The problem is you may not know it for the next 10, 20, or 30 years on what kind of fruit you're going to get out of that relationship. So we want to talk about principles of money. And I want to talk to you about the first thing first principle here, and that is that God owns everything. God owns it all. I mean, that's the big idea that the Bible gives us, that Jesus gives us, and not just Jesus, but Jesus, guys like Moses from the Old Testament, what did Moses do? Well, God called him, and he rescued the whole tribe of Israel, the whole people of Israel, a couple of million people out of slavery in Egypt, where they had to worship all kinds of gods and had all kinds of ideas about the way the world worked. And so Moses spoke into their existence and helped them to understand that everything that is in this world didn't come from a bunch of different gods, but came from one God. There's guys like King David, who was the high king of Israel, probably the top dog of all the kings of Israel, who speaks into money. There are guys like, of course, Jesus, who speaks about money. And Paul in the New Testament writes about money as well. And the problem is we live in this mystical world that, like, if it has our name on it, it belongs to us, right? That's the way we live life. My car title has my name on it, Steve Miles, F-150, 2010 pickup truck, whatever. And I'm thinking, okay, it's mine. I'll do with what I want to. My house title, it doesn't actually have my name on it or my wife's name. We have some kind of a trust, but it has our names on it, so to speak. And so it's like, hey, this belongs to me. It's mine. I will do what I want with it. But here's what the Bible tells us. Job, who was an Old Testament character, this is one of the oldest books of the Bible written, God says this to him. He says, "Who has a claim against me that I must repay? Everything under heaven belongs to me." That's a pretty solid statement that, like, God really thinks that everything belongs to him, right? And this is true not just in a general sense, but in a specific sense. Moses, writing to the people of Israel, helping them to understand, who is this one God who's delivering you out of slavery to Egypt? Here's what he says. Here's what God says. The whole earth is mine. The whole earth. Everything you see around you, guess what? It's mine. Psalm 50, King David says this, "For every animal of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird in the mountains, and the creatures of the field are mine." So it's tempting to say, that God owns the hills, but we own the cattle. No. He owns it all. And the thing is, he owns not just the cattle. God says this, it's not just my hill, it's just not my cattle. Like, it's my Yukon, it's my F-150, it's my Tesla, it's my house, it's my guitar, it's my kids. Those things all belong to me. And Haggai, this prophet from the Old Testament, he says this. He says, "Even the gold and the silver are mine." That's what God says. Because you can think, well, why is God concerned about gold and silver? He says, because they're mine. They belong to me. And you could say, well, look, at least I got some change in my pocket. No, you don't. You don't have a pocket and you don't have a change. They're not yours. They're not mine. God has put everything that we have we are his managers, we're his stewards, we're the ones who have the ability to manage what God puts into our lives, but we do not own it. And I realize that sounds crazy. You may be sitting there going, man, I've worked hard, I got a degree, I got all this business prowess over my career. I know how things work. I know how to handle money. I know how to handle wealth. And I've gotten, all through this hard time of getting where I am today. Well, here's what Moses says that God says. He quotes God here saying this about even our strength and our ability and our smarts. He says, now, you may say to yourself, guys, okay, Jubilee, you may say this to yourself, "My power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember, the Lord your God is he who gives you the ability." Like, even your ability to produce, your ability to figure things out in your mind, they are not yours. They're God's. The ability that I have to stand up here and speak to you, they're on loan from God. There's something that he says, you get to manage this. It's not something that I have as possession, that I own it. So therefore, I have to be careful about how I think about it and then how I use it or manage it. Matthew 25:14 says, this is Jesus speaking. Okay, Matthew's one of his key disciples, and he's writing some of the things down that he remembers Jesus saying. And here's what he says. Again, the kingdom of heaven will be like a man going on a journey who has called his servants, and he's entrusted property to them or to us. And in verse 19, he says, the master will return to see how we used what was entrusted to us. Wow. That's pretty stiff, isn't it? The issue here today that we want to deal with is an issue of ownership. Because if we get money wrong, then we don't see God as the owner of everything, and then we will be horrible at things like generosity. Because anytime we feel like God is moving us or asking us or directing us in some way to give what He has put in our possession, our stewardship, we will feel like He's taking something away from us, and there's nothing further from the truth. He is not taking something from you. He is requiring of you what belongs to Him. And if you get this right, if you understand this idea, this principle about ownership, who actually owns things, then money and the way that the Scriptures talk about money is going to make a whole lot more sense to you. Otherwise, it's just going to be this foreign concept that you cannot comprehend. So I want us to understand that. So I asked my son-in-law for permission to share this story. Sam is married to my second daughter, Carissa, and they've been married for about 4 years. Well, just before they were getting married, Sam was over at our house, and he and Carissa had brought this beautiful box of cookies that actually Sam's mom and dad, Jim and Renee, they made to give to us. And we learned later, like, they do this all year long. They'll actually make, or like all fall, they'll start making cookies now, and they bag them up and they freeze them, and then they just like box them up and they distribute them to friends and family and people that they want. And they are beautiful and they are delicious. I was so grateful to have that. So Annette was like, okay, great. This is wonderful. I want to give them a thank you note, and I'm going to send them some of my English toffee. Now, I don't know if you've had my wife's English toffee. It is amazing. I mean, it's like the one treat through Christmas time. You ask all the kids, you ask anybody who says, it's like my favorite. That's the one. I mean, it's amazing stuff. So she bags up. Now, English toffee, you don't like give a whole big box of. You give just a little bit because it's super sweet and rich and yummy, and you just can't give a whole lot of it at one time. So she bags up this smaller bag of chocolate, and she sends that and a thank you note through Sam. He's going to go see his parents to take it to them and give them the thank you note. Well, several weeks go by, and it's getting into February because Chris and Sam had gotten married. They went on a honeymoon. They came back, and we got curious, like, hey, what did Jim and Renee think of the toffee? Did they enjoy that? And Sam got this real kind of like sheepish look on his face, and he's kind of shuffling his feet, and Carissa goes, it never made it. He ate the whole thing before he even got it to their house. In fact, he didn't even give them the thank you card because it mentioned, I'm like, oh my gosh, now they think we're terrible people. Sam, what were you thinking? He's like, well, I tried one, and I thought, oh, well, I'll just have another one. And he said, son, I looked down and the bag's empty. And it's like, oh man, what do I do here? Well, Sam's part of the family. He can have toffee anytime we have it at the house. He can have as much as he wants whenever he's there. We do not mind whatsoever. We love for him to enjoy that. However, this particular bit of toffee was meant for somebody else. He was in the wrong to gobble that down for himself, right? He thought just a little taste, and the next thing you know, the box is empty or the bag is empty. Guys, we do the same thing with our money, don't we? It's like, hey, I just want this little thing for myself. I just want to indulge in this a little bit. And God says, look, you're free to enjoy everything. But when I ask something of you, that's no longer, like, you get to enjoy giving that away. God, we treat God the same way. Every good and perfect gift comes from God the Father above, but as soon as it hits our hands, we kind of go psycho a little bit, like it belongs to us. Like it's just gobble it down. Let's use it up now because we may not have more for later. Now, Sam had gotten toffee from our house. He could enjoy it anytime we want to. We get all we have from God. We can enjoy it however we want to. But look, it's His, and we need to use it the way He wants us to and to give it when He says to give it. God gives us things, and I think He wants us to enjoy what He has graciously given. I absolutely believe that. I also know that, like, we have to give account to Him. And he loves it when his people share things, right? Just like on Christmas, when we gave our kids gifts, we anticipated that they weren't just going to go, mine, mine, mine. You know, that's going to happen a bit. But we're going to train them. Look, hey, no, this is yours to be able to share and to give to other people. We put parameters around the gifts we give, right? This isn't just for you. You have a responsibility, as you've enjoyed it, to help other people to enjoy it as well. So we want God to be able to be able to say that to us. Look, this is good for you to have, but it's good for you to share, and I am the one who owns this. And we forget quickly, so quickly, that God's the good giver. He's the only true giver, really. What you and I do, we don't actually give. We just responsibly tend to what God has given us, right? And so we share it with other people because it's not ours. And the thing is, he gives us new life. It's a gift that he gives us through the person of his Son. God says, look, here is my beloved Son. He's yours. Now we took him and we crucified him, put him on a cross, killed him. That's the way we handled the gift of God. Yet he rose again and he offers us again life, grace upon grace. Because we mess things up, right? We've committed ultimate sins of pride and arrogance against God. And we think more highly of ourselves as we ought to think. And yet God says, no. I love you. I'm giving to you. I'm generous to you. When we begin to think, hey, all that is in my life here, it belongs to me, well, we're sadly mistaken. We're just like Adam and Eve in the garden, right? God had given them everything, a garden to tend, the whole earth to fill, but they wanted to do this. They wanted to take it for themselves. They began to love the creation more than they loved the Creator, and Satan came in and fed that desire. And his entire game plan, Satan's entire game plan about possessions and money is simply to make you think this: I could do it better without God. I can do it without him. I don't need him. In fact, if he weren't here, if I could just enjoy all the good stuff without God, then it's going to be better. That's the lie of Satan. It's been perpetrated from the very beginning. Page 3 in your Bible till now, it's the same lie over and over again. That's what he does. But the reality is, Jesus reminds us again, no, God is not stingy. He is not withholding. He's not taking away from you. He is a giver. And Jesus actually, in the biggest sermon that he preached, we call it the Sermon on the Mount. It's recorded like in Matthew 5 through chapter 7. It's a pretty good, beefy amount of stuff to read. But in there, he says this in this keynote address to his people about what the kingdom of God is like and what God is like. He says this. He says that God causes his sun, the S-U-N, sun to rise on both the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. So even if you're here today and you think yourself unworthy of the good things that God gives, here's the deal. He gives it anyway. He gives it anyway. You go outside today, whether you are the worst sinner in the world or the most righteous saint in the world, you get to enjoy a sunny, beautiful day outside. Isn't that amazing? If it were raining today, you would get the same benefit. Your garden's still going to get watered just like everybody else's, good or bad. See, God is generous. He's not taking, he's giving. He's a generous giver, and he does not need your money. He doesn't need my money. Here's what he says. David, again, King David records this in Psalm 50. He says, if I was hungry, I would not tell you because the whole world is mine. The whole world's mine. You're not feeding me. You're not adding to my bank account. No, it's all mine. You just get to partake in it. You get to enjoy some of it. So theologically, we believe that God is the only one who is truly self-sufficient. You may think, I'm a self-made person. I have pulled myself up by my bootstraps. Let me tell you what, you have no boots, you have no straps, unless God gives it to you, right? And he's not at all dependent upon us. God is trying to do this for us. He's not trying to get money from you. He's trying to keep money from getting a hold of you, right? He's not trying to get a hold of your money and take it away from you. He's trying to make sure that money doesn't get a hold of you. Because again, money is a very spiritual thing. And it has roots to it. And we have to be very careful to not let it get a hold of us. All right. So a couple of really practical things here, all right? I'm going to move into some real practical stuff here. Here's what I'd like for you to do for the next week. And I don't usually do this kind of stuff. I don't usually say, hey, you need to try this. We'll try this. Get out a piece of paper, write this down. You don't need to. It's pretty easy to remember. Here's what I want you to do. I just want you to keep track of your money this week. I want you to be a private investigator checking to see all the places that your money goes this week. I want you to be spying on your money, figuring out where that money is going. And it's a very simple thing to do, right? Each day, you simply take, if you buy something at the store, you take your receipt, you stick it in your wallet or your purse or whatever, and then when you get home that night, you've got a few minutes, you take a sheet of paper and you simply write down, Walmart 6512, groceries, whatever. You write it down. $65.12. You probably didn't buy much at Walmart if that's what you spent. You simply write it down. Well, maybe you don't need to do that. Like maybe you've got a spreadsheet, you're more geeky and you have a spreadsheet. Okay, type it in to your spreadsheet. Or maybe you use something like Quicken or Mint.com. I don't care. There are money products out there that can help you to track your money. But pay attention every single day. Where did your money go today? And by the end of the week, you'll start to see some patterns that you may or may not be happy with. I remember Annette and I have done that kind of thing over time. We've kind of tried to track our money. Because the reality is, we got to be knowing where our money be going, right? I mean, that's the reality of things. You got to be knowing where your money be going. Because if you don't, it's like, hey, you're being irresponsible. But Annette and I have done that over time, and we'll continue to do that because we want to make sure that we're using God's money responsibly. We're managing His wealth. You are a money manager for God. Put that on your business card, God's money manager, right? I mean, just put that on there. Keep that in your wallet with you. Because the reality is that you are going to have to give account to God for what it is that you're doing with money. Matthew 25:14 again says, "For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted them with his property." You've been entrusted with God's property. Now, I have a money manager, Edward Jones, but it's like a friend of mine named Alex. He's my money manager, and he helps me out with understanding investments. And I can't imagine going into his office someday and go, "Hey, Alex, tell me about my investments. Where's my money going?" And, and he just looks at me like, "I don't know. I don't keep track of that." I mean, I've got a few things here that I do, but I'm not very organized. And files are kind of all over the place, and it's not my responsibility to track all that, is it? And it's like, yeah, that's what I pay you for. I actually pay you money to be able to track my retirement fund, which is really tanking right now. But I want to know how that's going. What's it invested in? Could we be investing it better? I don't know. Can you imagine that happening? How I would be furious to know that I've got a money manager who's not paying attention to where my money goes, right? In fact, I would probably say, I'm taking my business elsewhere. I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to figure this out myself because you're not doing the job. In fact, what would end up happening with my friend is he would end up in jail because he's mismanaged somebody else's money. You can't do that. That's illegal in this country. Now, it's interesting that we have this high value of expectation for other people handling our money, right? But we may not have the same attitude toward God handling His money, about being accountable, about having a budget. But we need to be accountable because we've been entrusted with God's resources. And so keep track of where your money is going this week, okay? Just spend a little time doing that at the end of each day. Pay attention to that. Annette and I, as I said, we've been married 36 and a half years, and we've done this multiple times. I remember the first time that we got to that assignment, track everything that you spend for, I think the guy said for a month, so it was 30 days. And so we did that, and then we broke it all down, and it was a pretty good picture of how we were spending our money. And so there have been times when we have budgeted in such a way that she's the one who kind of runs the budget. She takes care of all that. There have been times when I do it, and there have been times that we do it together. It's not important who in the household does the tracking and all that, but you need to be doing it together, and you need to be doing it in a way that you both know kind of what's going on here. And there's a few principles that Annette and I have lived with now for our lives together. We want to have a plan for where our money's going. That's called a budget, the B word. Nobody likes to use that word, but it's a spending plan. We want to know where our money's going. The second thing is we don't spend money without a plan. Number two, we don't spend more than like $50 outside of that plan without talking to one another first. Like we'll make I bought a new pair of earbuds the other day because actually mine got dropped in the street and run over by a car. And so I thought, hey, that's $18. I'm just going to do it. And it's not a big deal. But anything that's like around 50 or more, it's like, hey, let's talk about that. Now, maybe for you, you might have a finer tooth comb. Maybe you go like, no, you don't spend $10 without talking to each other about. Or it might be like, $1,000. I don't know. You figure that out. But I recommend that. Talk to one another about purchases that you're making that are outside of your planned categories of spending. And don't make any major purchases without talking to close and trusted friends who will give you good counsel and advice from the scriptures themselves. So don't buy a car, don't buy a refrigerator, don't buy a house, without talking that over, because those are major expenditures. And I just found over the years of marriage, that is just a super helpful way to make sure that I'm a follower of Jesus, and I don't want to get tied into things that are going to actually distract me from following him. And if you're a follower of Jesus, I want to recommend that course of action. Make sure your spouse, you guys have a plan about making expenditures outside of your main plan, and then talk to people about how you're spending, especially big purchases. Or if you see that you're getting off track and you can't seem to do it together, talk to somebody about it. Find a trusted friend and advisor who's following Jesus so that you guys can get back on track. Okay, so I'm not asking you to do all that today. I'm just saying, hey, for the next 7 days, track your money. And then next week, we're going to talk a little bit more into that. Get on the same page with your spouse if you haven't done that yet. Because the reality is, it's not just your money or her money or his money or her money. Hey, it's our money. It's what God has put into our purview to be able to take care of. All right, for those of you who are a bit younger, I don't see many of you, but a few of you who are in that high school, middle school, college age range, let me just give you some good advice how to deal with your parents when it comes to money, okay? You ready for this? If you will track your money, because I know what's happening. Your parents are giving you an allowance, or maybe they're paying you for chores done, right? They are supporting you in some way, giving you money, hopefully to train you how to use it a little better. So if you will start keeping track of where you spend your money, because someday you're going to want more, right? You're going to come to mom and dad and say, hey, I'd like some more money, please. And then they're going to look at you and go, what did you do with the money I gave you? If you have it written down, here's where I spent my money, here's why I spent my money that way, guess what? The chances are very, very high that if they can, if they have the capacity to, they're going to increase your income. Because you have a plan. You're being responsible. You're actually taking and realizing that what you have is not your own. It's a great training ground for following Jesus. What you have is not your own. It's been given to you by somebody else. And so when you ask for money, guess what? Chances are they're going to say, yeah, thank you for laying that out for me. Appreciate it. Way to go. Way to be responsible with what I've given you. All right, so you're sitting here today, you go, okay, Steve, this is super practical, not very spiritual. I feel like I've been at a financial seminar instead of a sermon today. I get it, I understand. But the thing is, it's very spiritual. The way that we view money and the way we handle money has a lot to do with who we are in God and the way we view our relationship with God. The issue is that you are starting to step into reality, into truth that is going to transform you and is going to transform the way that you view the world around you. And so when you're honoring and making the most of what God has entrusted to you, it is a very spiritual decision. It's not just pragmatics. It's not just, paper and pencil. No. It has to do with your very heart. Here's what Luke, who was not a disciple of Jesus directly. He wasn't one of his disciples at the time Jesus was on the earth, but he did one-on-one conversations with all the followers of Jesus at that time. He did some interviews with them and said, tell me what Jesus said. Tell me what Jesus talked about. I want to know. Well, here's what Jesus said according to one of those interviews. He says, look, here's Jesus. One who is faithful in a very little is faithful with much. The one who is dishonest, this is a very spiritual principle, right? The one who's dishonest in very little is dishonest with much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you true riches? Fair question, right? If you're not taking care of these little things, why should we give you more. And if you've not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? God owns it all. And we've been entrusted with worldly wealth, earthly wealth, as a test for how we will handle heavenly wealth, authority, power, relationships. Those kind of things are all tied together with how we're handling this very worldly kind of thing called money. You all know the story about Judas. Judas is one of Jesus' 12, right? He's one of the 12 closest human followers to Jesus at the time Jesus was walking this earth. And Judas had a control over the money bags. He was the accountant. He was the CPA. He was the guy who actually took care of the money for Jesus and his disciples, because they had money to be able to rent a space or to get rent a donkey or whatever it is they had to do, buy some food. They had someone who was in charge of that. His name was Judas. And guess what? He was probably given that responsibility because he had some skill and some ability in that. But the reality is, like what you see at the end of his life, is he betrays Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. He betrays Jesus for money. Money got the better of him. In fact, when we look through the scriptures, what we realize is the reason it seems that the tipping point seemed to be when a woman decided she was going to worship Jesus with like all she had. She had this perfume that was like worth a year's wages. I don't know what you make. Maybe you make $48,000. Maybe you make $24,000. I don't know what you make. Imagine that. Whatever it is that you make in a year, you take all of that income and then you spend it on a bottle of oil, and then you pour it out on this guy named Jesus. What are your friends going to think about you? You have lost your cotton-picking mind. That's what they're going to think about you. Well, Judas was very offended because the thing is, he was in charge of the money. And he thought this should have been sold so that more could be put in the money bags. Why was he so concerned about that? Because he kept pilfering from the bags. That's the testimony of the scriptures. He kept taking a little out for himself every now and then. See, money can work its way into our hearts to cause us to even betray our most precious Savior, Jesus. In other words, what Judas kept was not his own, but he used it as if it was. So here's the question. Why did Jesus give Judas the responsibility of that money? Why did he do that? I bet it kind of felt like a test, honestly. He's testing. Where's your heart? Maybe you're here today and you have like more than the common. Like you've got more than most of us wealth-wise. And you might begin to think, hey, I know the score. I know how to handle money. I've climbed the ladder. I've done all the stuff. I'm pretty smart with money and all that thing. Be careful here, guys, because it's not your money. You can't just use it as you please. You need to consult the owner. You need to have a relationship with him, to talk to him about how to handle money. Because the reality is, in Luke 10, verse 13, it says this: no servant can serve two masters. You either hate the one and love the other, or you're devoted to the one and you despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Hang on. Don't you mean God and devil? No, I don't mean God and devil. I mean God and money. That's what Jesus says. That's what he means. The heart pull on you, your spiritual heart strings are pulled toward one or the other. You're either pulled more toward finance and money for yourself, or you're being pulled toward Jesus by that. So what about you? Judas loved money more than he loved God, more than his Savior Jesus. The Bible says that we're all prone to worship created things rather than the Creator. Adam and Eve certainly fell prey to that deceitful lie of Satan. They started loving the creation more than they loved the Creator. And so instead of managing the creation and loving God, they ended up trying to manage God and loving creation. And I think we can be the same way. The reality is, though, there's a second Adam. There's a better Adam. The Bible, the New Testament, talks about Jesus as this better Adam, someone who didn't love the creation more than he loved the Father. He loved the Father more, and he gave everything to be able to serve the Father. In fact, he gave his only life up in response to the Father's will. And he says, not my will, but thine be done. Guys, as apprentices to Jesus, as disciples of his ways, we must have developed the same heart attitude toward God. God, it's yours, it's not mine. My hands are empty. My heart is full. God, would you come and use me and use these things that you put in my possession to your glory? Jesus went to the cross. He paid it all. And he pours out lavish grace on you and on me. And our heart response is to be one of worship, to know that our God does not lie. He is a promise-keeping God. He will take care of you. He wants you to take care of what he puts in your possession. Let's stand up together. We're going to worship for just a moment here and trust this great Jesus who has given us so very much. Just as the band's coming up, I just want us to stand quietly here in a posture to just receive from God, receive from his Holy Spirit. I realize that some of these things may be new to you. You're here today and it's all new. It's like, what is going on here? And I believe that God's wanting to open up our eyes to see things differently, to have a different perspective about his creation, about the things that are in our care, the people that are in our care, that they are gifts from God. Can we just quietly just kind of receive that right now from God? I believe he says to us this morning, all that you have, my hand has provided. Come, Holy Spirit. Remind us of the truth. Fill our hearts with gratitude this morning. I felt earlier that so we were worshiping, I felt like there was someone here today who your life has just felt like you're just being worn out, just dragged, worn out. And it's like rushing from one activity to the next. And it's like soccer, and then youth events, and then work, and then family obligation. And it's just like, I felt like there was, what I saw was someone in their bathroom just crying out for relief from the anxiety and the pain and the rushed life. And if that's you today, I want to ask you to come forward and receive prayer today. I mean, you were in the bathroom I feel like it was just this week. You were there. You're crying out to God, feeling so anxious, so worn out. I feel like the Lord wants to minister to you today. So if that's you, just come forward in these moments. If not, it's fine. I'm used to not always hearing things rightly. Jesus, in these moments, we yield ourselves to you. Here are our hands. Here are our feet. Here are our minds, our affections, our hearts, desires. We offer them all back to you in worship. Let's sing together.